Hello.
Our story begins inside the Jedi Temple. Anakin was pushed back out of Barriss Offee's room. She was the traitor. She was the one who framed Ahsoka for the Jedi Temple bombing. If Anakin could defeat her and get her to the Judiciary building, then everything would be handled and taken care of. He could save Ahsoka and she could return to being a Jedi. It'd be perfect to say the least. He couldn't focus on that at the moment. He was currently dealing with his blinding rage. He was beyond pissed at Barriss. What a poor excuse of a Jedi she was. Maybe Anakin wasn't the biggest believer in the Jedi, but for her to do something so egregious and then blame it on her friend was ridiculous, especially for her age. Barriss was only a year younger than Anakin. How could she act in such a belligerent manner? Anakin was letting his rage take over. He was a very powerful duelist, and so with each strike he took, Barriss was nearly knocked off of her feet. But because of her tiny size, she was able to use Anakin's size against him. The classic tale of large warrior versus smaller. Each time Anakin's blade connected, Barriss recoiled. Her body shot back a little and she had to recover. At the moment she was using two red lightsabers, the ones that belonged to Asajj Ventress before she stole them from her. As their blades clashed together, the sound drew a number of temple guards. Anakin saw his advantage closing in on her. The guards yelled at her to cease hostility. She had to get out of here somehow, and now she was cornered. Barriss was quick with her movements, and she jumped up on the side of the wall and used it to propel herself forward. Anakin was thrown from his feet, but the temple guards were quick to move in. Barriss was now fully engulfing herself in the dark side of the Force. Being knocked off his feet only made Anakin angrier. When he got up, their duel returned to a 1 versus 1, Anakin versus Barriss. Their exchanges were deadly and vile, but Anakin retook his advantage. He was able to throw Barriss around with his remarkable strength, but Barriss saw her advantage here. Each time Anakin swung, he left his core open. It was because while his speed was remarkable and nothing to joke about, his heavy strikes left him open. Barriss picked the pattern apart, barely surviving each time their blades smacked together. She then got her opportunity. Anakin lifted his blade above his head, and her lightsaber slid across his stomach. He dropped to the ground immediately. The guards who were in the room, trying to split the two duelists up, were left in shock. Anakin was one of their best warriors, and he was just bested by a Jedi Padawan, who despite being in close age to him, was not the chosen one. Maybe the prophecy was wrong. Anakin crawled on the floor with pain circulating throughout his body. He couldn't believe what had just happened to him. He was completely blindsided by it, as he tried to look for a means to escape the pain he was in. Before Barriss could be captured, her blade was driven into Anakin's back. Any chances of saving him were now lost. Barriss was tackled to the ground as the temple guards got to Anakin and checked. Anakin was still alive. Before the guards could try and get him to the medical facilities, he grabbed one of their wrists and told them to make sure Ahsoka was saved, to get Barriss to the Judiciary building as fast as possible. The guard nodded her head, and when she turned to relay the order, Anakin's hand that was wrapped around her wrist slipped and fell to the ground. When she turned around, Anakin was gone. The light faded from his eyes, and he was a victim of the dark side. A young death may have been a better fate for him anyways. The guards turned their attention to Barriss, issuing out orders to each other to assemble the council when they were done. One of the guards would take Skywalker to the morgue, where he would be kept until his burial ceremony. The guards quickly ushered Barriss from the temple to the Republic Judiciary building, and they did so in perfect timing. They were able to save Ahsoka from the death penalty that Tarkin almost levied against her. Barriss, upon Palpatine's request, was taken away, but something was off. Palpatine could feel it, but so could every present Jedi. Where was Anakin? Padme, who was representing Ahsoka in the case, turned around and tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be seen. She turned her head and looked up into the audience where the Jedi had gathered, and they had all gotten up at this point, making their way for the exit. The news had reached them. When Ahsoka was unshackled, she was approached by Master Kenobi. Padme was with Ahsoka, and she was congratulating her on her victory. Obi-Wan asked Ahsoka if she could speak to Padme alone, and Ahsoka nodded her head. Behind Obi-Wan was Master Plo, who placed his hand on Ahsoka's shoulder and guided her out of the room. The council, aside from Plo and Obi-Wan, left the building to return to the temple to prepare Anakin's funeral. The procession would likely be much larger than just any ordinary Jedi. He was a Jedi everyone knew about, and people in the Republic might want to memorialize him. Obi-Wan took Padme to the side and sat down with her. She could see something was wrong, but what she was about to hear, she would have never been able to prepare herself for. Obi-Wan gently took her hand and suggested that he knew that there was always something more going on between her and Anakin. He didn't mind that it was the case, but he wanted to personally let her know what had happened. Obi-Wan stopped for a moment. He heard the words, he felt the pain, but he hadn't registered the loss. With Padme's hand in his, with extreme curiosity and worry on her face, he choked in his words. Obi-Wan looked to his side. He felt in the same position he was when he lost both Satine and Qui-Gon. Both of their losses ate away at him, and now the person he raised from a young age, his only student, was gone. Obi-Wan took a deep breath and looked at Padme with a tear crawling in his eyes. His voice cracked under the pressure of informing her that he was gone. Padme could see it. She knew before he said the words, but they winced out of his mouth and she fell into tears. The reaction Padme gave was like slow motion for Obi-Wan. He watched her eyes begin to bawl into a puddle of tears, and then she was consumed by pain. Obi-Wan felt that same pain, and the two of them, longtime friends, embraced each other. Not far away from them, Plo stood next to Ahsoka. She could sense that something was wrong. Plo turned and took his hand off of her shoulder and told her that her master had perished fighting Barriss Offee. Ahsoka put her hand over her mouth and tried to find the words to say or the thoughts to think, but she couldn't. Her heart broke into a million pieces, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt for this. She loved Anakin to death. He was like her older brother. He was her master. They were the perfect duo, and now her best friend was gone. The stress of the case against her was bad enough, and she felt the emotions of both the court case and the death of her master. It all hit her at once. She had come to terms with the possibility of being killed, and yet she never expected that her master would be the one to die. It rattled her to her bones, and she put her face into Plo's chest. He understood. To lose a master wasn't easy. At nearly 300 years old, he had come to terms with many deaths. But he could feel how badly this was affecting those that cared about Anakin. He was a shining example of hope. The Republic and the Jedi looked to him, and now he was gone. Hours later, the Council would inform Ahsoka that she was welcomed back into the Order as a Jedi Knight. That is, if she wanted. Ahsoka was very skeptical, but without Anakin, what would happen to the 501st? She didn't want to leave them without a general. The likely reality is that Captain Rex would become Commander or Marshal Commander, but that didn't matter. She wanted to ensure her men were taken care of. Ahsoka pondered over the option. Her initial reaction was to leave the Jedi Order. However, maybe there was something she could do. Ahsoka told the Council that she would only reconsider joining the Order if she could lead the 501st. They looked at each other questioningly. Mace asked why she wanted to lead that army. She responded, telling them that she refused to let them be alone. She didn't want them to struggle or be without a Jedi, especially a Jedi that wasn't her. She remembered the horror stories from Umbara, and she didn't want them to go through that again. Mace looked at the other council members to see if anyone had any grievances with that, and no one did. So it was decided. Ahsoka would return to the Jedi Order as a Jedi Knight and the official Jedi General of the 501st. While this discussion was underway, Palpatine took Barriss back to his lair on the far side of Coruscant and began to torture her for her inexcusable actions. They didn't plan the bombing, but she did kill his future apprentice. He tortured her with electricity until she could hardly move. She begged him to kill her, but she wouldn't get out of this easy. She costed him a future pupil, and now she had a debt to pay. If she didn't serve the debt, then she would be tortured way more than she could even believe is possible. She asked how that could be, and with a glimmer in his twisted eyes, he told her that the dark side of the Force was a pathway to many abilities, some considered to be unnatural. In reality, she was likely going to become a following student to Dooku. She was younger, much more agile, and she could likely be more manipulated where Dooku could not. This made her an attractive offer. Sure, she would never be as powerful as Vader, but she would at the very least be suitable until someone else came along, or he was able to master cloning. After Ahsoka committed herself to the Jedi Order once more, the Jedi would hold a public ceremony for Anakin so that citizens of the Republic may pay their respects, and then afterwards, there would be a closed-off funeral for the Jedi. Anakin's coffin would be placed on the steps of the Jedi Temple. People would walk up the steps and leave little messages, flowers, or an assortment of gifts. Some of these people came from the Outer Rim, and others from the Mid-Rim. He laid in state for a number of days, so that people around the galaxy could say their goodbyes, and the people said their goodbyes. Afterwards, Anakin would be brought inside the Jedi Temple, and the Jedi would remember him. Their procession would be across the halls of the temple, all the way into the burial room, where everyone who was allowed were located. The procession through the Great Hall was lined with clone troopers, most notably the ones Skywalker served with. In front of the coffin were Obi-Wan in the middle, Ahsoka on the right, and Padme on the left. The process would be very difficult to endure. In another part of the room were Captain Rex and ARC Trooper 5s. It was a very long day for everyone who knew Anakin, as they all said their final goodbyes to someone who influenced them each in their own lives. When everything was over, it was time for people to move on. They made their way back to the battlefronts, and the 501st did too. It was hard without Anakin leading the charge, and Ahsoka had large shoes to fill, but she did so with maturity and intelligence. It was by no means an easy task to fulfill, but she was a Jedi Knight at 17 for a reason. There would be some shortfalls, but when she buckled, someone was by her side. Each corresponding battlefront after Anakin's death would be more difficult than the one before, and with Ahsoka managing the troops well, they were able to pull victory after victory out. The Council respected Ahsoka greatly for her ability to stand strong in her greatest challenges, and they believed her to be worthy of the title she received. However, for another Jedi, it was much different. Since Anakin's death, Obi-Wan wasn't really the same. He was still actively on the battlefront, but the wit and sass that he distributed frequently, and his calm poise of a natural leader, all dissipated. Since he was on the front lines, no one one but his men picked up on it. His face aged decades in the span of months, and his broken stare left a lot for the imagination to wonder. Cody frequently asked Obi-Wan if he was alright, but the answer was always, tragically, the same. A simple nod of the head with a fine response. It was really difficult. The life had been sucked out of him. Before Anakin's death, Obi-Wan was always on the bridge. Afterwards, he was only seen before battles and during battles. On the battlefield, he was still on the front lines, but when they achieved victory, he would issue out a couple orders and then vanish again. He became a ghost general, and the men worried about him. They respected him greatly, and because of their adoration for him, they felt terrible about how much he had changed in such a short period of time. It was so drastic, they felt like he would possibly exit the war himself, but he never did. Obi-Wan on a personal level would spend hours upon hours meditating, trying to reach out through the Force or for guidance or for help. He knew what he was feeling was painful. He knew it was wrong according to the code, but it hurt so much. Satine and Anakin's deaths were only mere months apart. Could he handle to lose another person? What if it was Ahsoka or Commander Cody? He wouldn't know how to handle it. When Obi-Wan wasn't meditating or playing general, he was staring at the ceiling in silence. It was truly horrific. On the battlefront, Ahsoka attempted to distract herself from Anakin's death, which in reality worked. She was able to lead battles and win them. The Fighter in First typically saw more action than the 212th, and that didn't change here. Every other day they were on a new battlefront, and it was a brutal war. Ahsoka on her downtime would talk with Rex about her feelings, which she found to be incredibly helpful, but she couldn't deny her feelings about the entire situation. She was very hurt and betrayed by the Jedi, but her emotions for the clones were the reason she was still here, and Rex appreciated her loyalty as the clones appreciated her. Months after Anakin's death, after several successful battlefronts, the Fighter in First would find themselves on Ringo Vinda, with Jedi Masters Tiplar and Tip Lee. In their assault, they would find they worked really well with each other. Ahsoka, instead of splitting fives from her group, would have Rex take Appo, Vong, and a couple of other elite men to join Master Tiplar. Down the middle of the flank would go Ahsoka, with Fives, Top, Kix, and the rest of the men. The Jedi all converged in the middle area. If they could beat the droids back here, then they might be able to secure an advantage against the Separatists and win the battle. While they were engaging, one of Ahsoka's men was beginning to struggle. Something was wrong, which led him to take off his helmet. They were in the middle of the flank, so all the men on both sides could see it. Ahsoka also caught onto it at the last second, and she moved her torso just in time as a blaster shot fired. It clipped her in the shoulder and she slid into a barricade. Fives tackled Tup, and the other Jedi looked over at her. It definitely hurt, but she waved them on. They couldn't afford to lose this flank. Kix from across the battlefield ran over to make sure she was okay. Ahsoka told Kix to go check on Tup. He could take a closer look at her when the battle was won. Ahsoka regathered her composure and shot up, igniting her lightsabers again and leading the middle of the flank. Had Ahsoka broken, the battle would have likely turned out in the favor of the Separatist, but thanks to her, it didn't, and they were able to secure a partial victory. This led the two sisters, Tiplar and Tip Lee, to making a move on Trench's command center, leading to his eventual capture. The battle was most certainly not in their favor, but thanks to their hard work, the Jedi and the clones were able to secure a decisive victory. The capture of Trench didn't end the battle, it just amplified it. But because of his capture, the Republic was able to quickly secure the victory over the Separatists and drive them from Ringo Vinda. With the battle decisively won by the Republic, the Fighter in First was stationed here momentarily. When Ahsoka returned to her men, she found that they couldn't figure out what happened to Tup, so they insisted that he be taken to Kamino for further research. Fives volunteered and so did Rex. Ahsoka requested that she could accompany Fives to Kamino, and Rex stay here in charge of the troops for the time being. Rex was okay with this decision, especially since either way, there wouldn't be a need for either of them here. The battle was over, so it would be fine without the other. The trio would depart for Kamino. One of the reasons Ahsoka gave for going was because she wanted to see if she could trigger Tup's reaction. She knew that Shaak Ti was present on base, but Tup shot her, not Shaak Ti. It would be better to see his reaction to Ahsoka rather than Shaak Ti. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Nala Se, the chief medical scientist in Tapoka City, took over the project and oversaw it. Everything was fine because Shaak Ti was present, but as the hours carried on, Ahsoka saw that not everything was fine. She spent time with Shaak Ti while she was here because in her mind it made more sense to be with Shaak Ti, but now she was getting suspicious as ARC Trooper Fives was acting off. So Ahsoka began spending time with Fives, and she learned that he had taken the inhibitor chips from himself and Tup. When Nala Se came into the room, she took the chips, informing Fives that it was Republic property. This was harsh to say the least, but he gave them up, and upon learning that he would have his mind wiped, he panicked. Ahsoka and Shaak Ti were unaware of the programming, but they had to get Fives before he did any damage to others around him. Through the corresponding events, Fives would end up with the chips and the data he needed to prove his innocence, and prove that there was a plot. Shaak Ti and Ahsoka would accompany Fives back to Coruscant, and with Ahsoka there, Nala Se would not have the ability to drug him. When they were brought before the Chancellor, Palpatine wanted to talk to Fives alone, under the impression that he'd been drugged. He was then informed of the plot, But without the drugs, Fives simply responded in the most appropriate way he could, telling Palpatine that good soldiers follow orders. Palpatine was confused, so he elaborated a little bit more and allowed Fives to go free. Palpatine was very confused. Nala Se had a certain amount of urgency in regards to the situation. He'd make sure the Jedi didn't get the information that he just told Fives. Before the Jedi left the building, Fives told Ahsoka and Shaak Ti everything he heard. Ahsoka almost ran back, but Shaak Ti informed her they needed to make a calculated decision about it. Ahsoka understood. They would inform the Council of the information, and as they entered the vessel to head back towards the temple, it burst into flames with a massive explosion that killed 2 of them. Hours would pass by, flickering lights and medical droids working overtime to ensure the survival of the singular survivor. She woke up in a fuzz, looking around trying to figure out where she was. She couldn't see anything. Chances are her retina would never heal. She was mostly blind, so she called out, and a calming voice next to her told her that he was here. Ahsoka felt Obi-Wan's warm hands as he asked how she was feeling. She gripped his hands, paranoid by the darkness. Obi-Wan told her that it would be okay. He was right here. Ahsoka's mind drew a blank, and then she almost jumped out of the medical bay. She told Obi-Wan that the Council needed to know. A little voice called out, asking what they did need to know. It was Yoda, and so Ahsoka explained everything. She didn't need to see their faces to know their expressions. Yoda informed Obi-Wan that he would alert the Council, directing the Jedi Master to stay with Ahsoka, so Obi-Wan listened. Ahsoka asked what happened, and so Obi-Wan told her that the landing platform exploded. Ahsoka was badly burned, but for the most part, she was alright. It seemed Shaak Ti used her last breath to secure her safety. Both Fives and Shaak Ti were killed in the blast. Obi-Wan admitted that after Ahsoka gave the information, that Shaak Ti likely saved Ahsoka not just so she could survive, but so the information could be revealed. They were very close to losing Ahsoka. She was very unnerved by this information, and she continued to listen to Obi-Wan as he suggested she get some rest. He stood up and placed his hands on her shoulders and lightly pushed her back onto the bed. Obi-Wan told her that he wouldn't go anywhere until she was ready to leave, so if she needed anything, just say his name. He'd be in his seat next to her. Ahsoka slid back into a rest, and when she woke up, she was consumed by darkness. This was a fear for her. She feared the idea of being blind. She didn't want it, but now she was forced to live it, likely for the rest of her life. Obi-Wan informed her that she did a great service for the Republic, and she asked what he meant. Obi-Wan told her that because of her actions and her resilience, the Jedi were able to stop the Sith. The irony is it wasn't just one Sith. It was both. The Jedi had been tracking Palpatine's movements and set up spies everywhere, and it ended up leading to them to the industrial sector, just as Dooku was arriving. They thought it kind of ridiculous to put a secret lair here on Coruscant where the Jedi were, but seemingly it was Palpatine's arrogance. The Jedi made sure their approach was unnoticed, and then they recorded Palpatine and Dooku together before springing a trap. They lost some members during the skirmish. Saesee Tiin, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Depa Billaba, and Coleman Kaj were all victims. Ahsoka asked if the war was over, and Obi-Wan told her that it wasn't. While Trench was captured, Grievous was still on the loose, but Master Fisto and a detachment of his army had been tracking him down for a little while. Ahsoka asked how long she'd been sleeping for. Obi-Wan told her that she was in and out of consciousness for about the past week. She jolted up asking if it had really been that long. Obi-Wan told her it had been, but he explained that most of it was just medically induced. They were trying to ensure she got her vision back, and the medical droids did a lot of their operating while she was asleep. Ahsoka understood. She appreciated Obi-Wan for being with her and by her side throughout this entire ordeal, and he simply told her to go back to sleep. She had more operations coming, and they needed to be taken care of. Ahsoka drifted back into sleep, and Obi-Wan was called to the Senator's district, where all the Senator's residences were. He was confused, but when he got there, he was informed by Padme that she was pregnant. Obi-Wan shared his condolences with her, but out of curiosity, he asked what she was planning on doing. She was unsure, which is why she requested him to come talk with her. The two of them were struggling with the loss of Anakin. It had gotten a little bit more manageable, but it still hurt a lot. The two of them carried out their conversation, and when it was over, they came to the conclusion that the child would be allowed to join the Jedi Order with maternal supervision. Obi-Wan told her that he had no issue taking care of the child and training the child himself on behalf of Padme, but the maternal supervision would be a secret. Padme at this point was completely unaware she had twins, and she didn't have much excitement about finding out if her child was a boy or a girl. What a surprise she was in for. The reason she agreed to have a child allowed into the Order was because it would be difficult. C-3PO was a great protocol droid, but Padme would be stripping this child of the adequate care that it needed, especially the importance of her role as a senator and her lack of knowledge on when the war would actually come to a conclusion. It seemed like the best thing for her to do, so with so many uncertainties, it gave her a sense of relief. With the war carrying on, a rise in the Mandalore system would cause Bo-Katan to reach out to the Jedi for assistance, most specifically Obi-Wan Kenobi. He currently had Ahsoka with him and the 212. She was regaining her vision, and Captain Rex was promoted to commander in her absence. The boys in blue understood why she couldn't be there. Since the bombing on the landing platform, she was able to see roughly everything. But there were some blind spots, most specifically in her peripherals. Obi-Wan was working with her on that, and she was getting better with it. The war had been going on for about 6 months since Palpatine's death. Padme had almost given birth, and the war was seemingly coming to an end, with Fisto finally tracking down Grievous to the Outer Rim on Bau's pity. The Council split up to deal with the numerous campaigns, and the Separatist government was uprooted by Grievous, so Chancellor Chuchi could not just opt for a peace treaty. Bo-Katan's message was received by Obi-Wan, but he couldn't just simply deploy an army to Mandalore without the permission of the Council or the Republic. There were treaties in place, so Bo did all she could, which was sever the treaties between Mandalore and the Republic, so that Kenobi could lead an attack. It seemed like an elaborate way to get help, but he would do what was necessary. The Republic jumped down Mandalore's throat and a siege was ensuing. Without Skywalker or Palpatine, Maul had no intention of staging an operation large enough to draw the attention of the Republic, but it was a byproduct of his aggressive terms with Mandalore. Death Watch was split up in two, and Bo-Katan's rebels were trying to take their home back. The tragedy of Satine's death is it took her death to make Bo realize what she was a part of. When the Republic arrived and invaded, Maul was completely blindsided by this, so he prepared his troops and requested reinforcements from his little establishment criminal empire called Crimson Dawn. However, there was someone else prepared for this combat, that being his new apprentice, Barriss Offee. She escaped the clutches of Sidious when the Jedi got to him. She happened to run into Maul while he was on the run, because both Maul and Barriss were captured by Sidious around the same time, so it only did make sense for the two of them to run into each other. When the Jedi arrived amid the battle, they found themselves the culprits. Maul and Barriss both took something away from both of the Jedi they now faced. Each Jedi had a reason to want to kill the Sith, but would they, was the real question. Maul and Kenobi lined up against each other, while Ahsoka and Barriss did the same. Ahsoka was at a disadvantage here because she was still struggling with her vision, and her opponent killed Anakin Skywalker. This would be one of her toughest, if not her toughest, challenges. But the duel began. Kenobi and Maul once more on the field of battle, right over the spot where Satine died. How poetic, Maul thought. He could use that against Obi-Wan, but he would resist the bait. No point in faltering to it in Obi-Wan's mind. Maul and Kenobi's blades were speedy and their poise was remarkable. The decade worth of rivalry sat in their lap right in this moment. Obi-Wan knew he had to play this delicate, and wait for Maul to try and think he had the upper hand. Ahsoka, on the other hand, was matching pace for pace with Barriss. Their age difference may have been highlighted here, but Ahsoka and Barriss always sparred with each other, especially after Geonosis. They were as familiar as two non-master and apprentices duo could be. Their blades glided and the throne room was filled with the echoes of lightsabers. It was a remarkable sight. The fight between good and evil sat here. The Sith died or they lived in this room. Maul got an upper hand on Kenobi, or so he thought, while Barriss took advantage of Ahsoka's blindness. She was unaware of this, but she realized that Ahsoka was very weak on the right and left sides of her form. Kenobi was able to mount up a counter-assault against Maul in an unsuspecting way. Obi-Wan switched from his form to Qui-Gon's form, which gave Maul what he believed was the advantage, so he went with it, thrusting himself forward, but it proved to no avail. Obi-Wan precisely targeted Maul and killed him. Barriss, on the other hand, was not going to go down without a proper fight. She threw her blades at Ahsoka, but none of them landing a hit. But it didn't mean Ahsoka wasn't already pushed to the brim. Obi-Wan leapt across the room and got over in time to save Ahsoka. His blade parried a couple times with Barriss, and it was all that was required. She wasn't able to break through Obi-Wan's defenses. Ahsoka, on the other hand, because of her time recovering with Obi-Wan, bounced around him and landed a killing strike on Barriss. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka embraced each other. The fight was over. They just destroyed the Sith. Commander Cody called in reporting that Kit Fisto was able to defeat General Grievous. The war was coming to an end. With Chancellor Chuchi, the Republic would negotiate the Separatist terms of surrender, and with their surrender, a new era of peace would begin. As was negotiated by Padme and Obi-Wan, her twins, when they were born, were given over to the Jedi Order. Her focus on restructuring the Republic proved to be too much to coincide with raising two kids alone. Giving them up wouldn't be easy, but being able to be a part of their lives was all the more worth it. They would have their family there inside the Order, instead of a broken one at home. Of course, over time she would remarry with someone else, and she would have a new family with him, but she would still continue to visit her children with Anakin. By the time Luke and Leia were young adults, the Grand Master of the Order was Plo Koon, and the Master of the Order was now Kit Fisto, with both Mace Windu and Master Yoda passing away of natural deaths. Joining them on the High Council was Master Tano, Master Kelleran Beck, who oversaw most of Grogu's development thus far, and Caleb Dume. Luke and Leia's training would be personally overseen by Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, and they would make sure that the children grew into outstanding Jedi in this new era of peace. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Gallivant Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Jack Miller, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Manny Studios, Flynn Vassis, Anakin003, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the man with 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button, you know what to do. You want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. Otherwise, let's talk about the story real quick-a-rooney. I know Anakin's death isn't the most favorite thing to talk about, but I believe it allows for a more interesting circumstance to transpire, and that's why I like doing them. I like challenging what we can do with Star Wars, because I know Anakin and Luke, and of course Rey in the sequels, are the main characters of the story, and so, you know, if you remove those main characters from the story, what happens? And so when you take Anakin out of the story, out of the prequels, out of the Clone Wars, for in this example, it allows you to kind of twist it. And what I really want to do is I wanted to give Ahsoka some spotlight. I know she has a show coming out soon, but I felt like having her kind of take up his mantle would be something kind of poetic in its own way. The chances of Barriss beating Anakin are like 0, but, you know, for the purpose of the what if, she has to beat him, and I think the only way she does beat him is by him just being too angry, kind of like Mustafar. So I think in that circumstance is the only way that she does beat him is by being calmer than him, but obviously very unrealistic scenario, but it's a what if. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.